There is a button on your oven that promises to clean itself, and I want to tell you something that a lot of repair technicians know and almost never get to say out loud. That button is one of the fastest ways to kill your range. When you press self-clean, the oven locks its own door and heats the inside of the cavity to somewhere around 900 degrees, hot enough to turn baked-on grease into a little pile of gray ash. It works. The oven really does come out clean. But that same tremendous heat, trapped in that sealed box, also cooks the oven's own electronics, and a range that worked perfectly the day before you cleaned it can be stone dead the day after. Tonight I am going to show you exactly how that happens, and why the feature they put on the brochure is so often the feature that ends the machine. Let me start with what the self-clean cycle actually is, because once you understand it, the danger is obvious. Most self-cleaning ovens use what is called a pyrolytic cycle. Pyrolytic just means cleaning by heat. Instead of you scrubbing with a sponge and a spray, the oven does it by cranking the temperature far past any cooking heat, up to around 800 to 900 degrees, and holding it there for hours until every bit of food residue is burned down to ash you can wipe away with a cloth. To keep you safe, the door locks shut and stays locked until it cools. On the surface, it is a genuinely clever idea. Use the one thing an oven is good at, heat, to solve the one chore everybody hates. But here is the problem the brochure never mentions. An oven is not just an empty steel box. Packed in around that cavity, behind the panel, above the door, and along the back, are the parts that make it a modern appliance. The electronic control board that runs the whole thing, the wiring harness that carries power to the elements, sensors, the display, and a small safety part called the thermal fuse. All of that was designed to live near normal cooking heat. The self-clean cycle does not run at normal cooking heat. It runs hundreds of degrees hotter, for hours. And that heat does not stay politely inside the cavity. It soaks outward into the exact spaces where the delicate electronics live. So walk through what that extra heat does to each part, because this is the heart of it. Start with the thermal fuse. That fuse is a deliberate weak link, a little safety device whose whole job is to blow and cut the power if the oven ever gets dangerously hot. Guess what a 900-degree self-clean cycle looks like to a part like that? It looks like exactly the emergency it was built to stop. So the fuse does its job and blows, and now the oven will not heat at all until someone replaces it. Then there is the control board, the brain, often mounted right up behind the control panel where the escaping heat collects. Bake that board long enough, and its solder joints and components start to fail, and the wiring, the insulation around those wires, gets brittle and cracks under repeated high heat, which is both a failure and a real safety hazard. If you have ever had an oven mysteriously die right after you cleaned it, and now you finally understand why, then subscribe to Still Running, because naming the exact part and the exact cause behind these failures is the whole reason this channel exists. Now let me tell you the part that makes this so cruel, because it is all about the timing. The nastiest thing about self-clean damage is that it usually does not show up while the cycle is running. The oven finishes, the door unlocks, the cavity is spotless, and you think you have won. The board and the fuse and the wiring, though, have just taken a beating they were never designed for, and the damage is done, so the failure shows up the next time you go to use the oven. You preheat for Sunday dinner and nothing happens. No heat, or a dead display, or an error code. And because a day or two has passed, most people never connect the dead oven to the cleaning cycle they ran. They just think the oven picked that moment to fail on its own. The repair tech knows better. When a no-heat oven comes in, one of the first questions a good one asks is, "Did you run the self-clean recently?" The answer is yes, far more often than chance would explain. There is one more part that this heat loves to ruin, and it is the door lock itself. The self-clean cycle will not even run unless the door latch is shut, and it stays locked until the oven cools back down, all driven by a little motor and a switch. Cook that latch assembly at 900 degrees enough times, and it can seize or burn out. And now you have the worst of both worlds. An oven that will not finish cleaning, and a door that will not open. And when any of these parts finally go, the repair is not cheap. A control board or a latch assembly, plus the service call to diagnose it, can easily run a few $100s, on a range that may have only cost $500 or $600 to begin with. So once again you find yourself staring at a repair bill that rivals the price of simply starting over. Here is the re-hook, the thing to carry with you. The self-clean button is not a bonus feature that happens to be risky. It is a feature that works by doing the one thing most likely to destroy the electronics sitting right next to it. It uses extreme heat as a tool, in a box full of parts that extreme heat kills. That is not a flaw in how you used it. That is baked into the design of the feature itself. And you might reasonably wonder why they build it this way at all, if it is so hard on the machine. The answer is that self-clean sells. It is a checkbox on the feature list, a line the salesman can point to, a reason to pick this range over the plainer one sitting next to it. The high heat method is also cheap to add, because the oven already makes heat, so all it really needs is a door lock and a bit of software. Nobody set out to design a self-destruct button. They set out to add a selling point, as cheaply as possible, and the slow damage to the electronics was somebody else's problem for another day, which is to say, yours. And this hits older ovens the hardest, which is worth knowing. The manufacturers are aware of this problem. On many newer ranges, they have added a cooling fan that runs during the cycle, the same idea as the fan that cools the computer on your desk, to try to pull some of that heat away from the sensitive parts. It helps, but if your range is more than about 5 years old, or it is a simpler model without that protection, the self-clean cycle is a much bigger gamble, because the heat has a clearer path straight to the board. The irony is heavy here. The old, simple ovens that people swear were bulletproof often did not even have this feature, or ran it far cooler, and they just kept going for decades. You can hear this straight from the people who fix these machines. One appliance technician was thanked, publicly and with real gratitude, for being the very first tech the person had ever heard warn people not to use the self-clean cycle, because, as he put it, it is a very stressful cycle for the machine. That is the quiet consensus in the repair world, spoken out loud for once. And on the other side of it, people who own the old ranges keep saying the same kind of thing. One wrote that he is still rocking a 1980s range and that these appliances are simply bulletproof. The old one survives, partly because it was simpler and partly because nobody was ever tempted to bake its guts at 900 degrees. So what do you actually do with this? Because you still need a clean oven. First, and simplest, go easy on the self-clean button, or skip it entirely. If your range is older or basic, I would treat that button as a last resort, not a routine. Second, clean the oven the old-fashioned way most of the time. A little baking soda and water made into a paste, left overnight and wiped out, will handle the vast majority of messes without ever taking the temperature past normal. It is more elbow grease and far less risk. And if your oven happens to offer a steam clean option, which many newer ones now do, reach for that instead. A steam clean uses a cup of water and a much lower temperature, a couple hundred degrees rather than 900, to loosen up light soil, and it puts almost no stress on the electronics at all. It will not tackle a badly burned-on disaster the way the high heat cycle does. But for routine cleaning, it is far gentler on the machine, and that is exactly the trade you want to be making. Third, if you do run a self-clean cycle, pull the racks first so they do not discolor. Make sure the kitchen is ventilated because the fumes are real, and understand that you are rolling the dice, so do not run it the night before a holiday when you actually need the oven to work. I am not telling you the engineers were stupid, and I am not telling you the feature never works, because it does clean. I am telling you something more useful. The self-clean cycle fights grease with a level of heat that the oven's own electronics were never built to survive, and it does its damage quietly, so the machine dies a day later and no one connects the two. The feature the salesman brags about is, more often than anyone admits, the executioner. Now that you know how it works, you get to decide whether that convenience is worth the gamble, instead of finding out the hard way on a dead oven and a ruined dinner. If you want more of these quiet appliance killers dragged out into the open and explained, then subscribe to Still Running. Then go look at that self-clean button and understand that the safest way to use it, for the long life of your range, is very often not to use it at all.